We're joined by Mr. Ray Negron, and before we go any further, let's take a look at the book here. This is an author sitting next to me, among many other things, okay? New York Yankees, okay? You got that part? Okay. Ray, you have a little bit of an unconventional start to your career, going back to 1973. Give us a little background there with George Steinbrenner.
1973, outside Yankee Stadium. I'm doing graffiti with a couple of friends of mine, a cousin. All of a sudden somebody says, "Look out," everybody starts to run. I fall, I'm caught, I'm put in the Yankees holding cell, and the guy that caught me comes back, he says, "Give me the kid." They take me to the Yankee locker room, and that night I was the bat boy for the New York Yankees, and the guy that caught me was George Steinbrenner, an American shipbuilder.
Okay, now this is June 73.
Right.
He only bought the team January 3rd of 73, so
Right.
likely you didn't know much about him at that point.
Listen, being a Spanish kid from the neighborhood, I didn't know much about that. You know what I'm saying? It's not like I was watching the news every night. All I knew is that night, the guy that was the Yankees equipment manager, Pete Shee, he said, "You know who the guy was that caught you?" And I said, "Who?" And he said, "George Steinbrenner, the new owner of the Yankees."
Now, Pete Sheehy was also the clubhouse man for Babe Ruth, so he goes way back too. Now, what happened then? I mean, George gave you a chance.
After the ball game, he came back and asked me, "Did you like your job?" And I said, "I loved it." He said, "You want to keep the job?" And I said, "I would love to keep the job." He says, "Well, you won't be doing graffiti here anymore, and you will be, I want to see that you're doing well in school." And he lived up to his promise, and I lived to mine.
That's you're 15, 16 years old at the time, right?
Right.
Okay, now one of the things that George always wanted was to restore the Yankees to greatness. When he bought it from CBS, he wanted that so badly. When would you say that actually happened?
He had a 5-year plan, but remember, that started in 1973, and they won in 1976, so he was ahead of schedule. And let me just say, he had a lot of pride in that team and had a lot of pride in his players. And it wasn't like any other owner in sports, because he had his hands on it. He had his hands to the pulse of the neighborhood. He got to know the people, the Latin people. He got to know everybody, the blacks, the Italians. He knew every sector of the Bronx and who was where.
And he didn't want everybody to know he was kind of a caring, good guy, did he?
At the time, he could still go into the neighborhood on his own, and he had his driver, but generally speaking, he drove. The driver would sit in the back.
Okay, the Yankees lose the World Series in 76. They get swept by the Reds. They get Reggie. They come back and win in 6 against the Dodgers next year. In Game 6, Reggie hits 3 home runs on 3 different pitches. Where were you for home run number 3?
Home run number 1, I asked him to take a curtain call. He wouldn't do it. Home run number 2, I asked him to take a curtain call. He said, "I don't want to." I said, "If you hit a third, will you take a curtain call?" He said, "You're crazy, but I'll do it." And so in essence, when he hit the 3rd home run, I was in the bathroom taking a pee.
Okay.
And all of a sudden, I didn't think that it would go on one pitch. But what had happened was, all of a sudden, I heard the roar of the crowd. I didn't complete my job. I ran out, and as Reggie was walking into the dugout, I was going at him. And you see in the footage, I go to his ear, and I said, "Reggie, you promised." He looked at me, and then he ran out and took his curtain call.
Okay, now the Yankees go back to the World Series 78 and win again. In 81, they get beat by the Dodgers. The 80s, though, were lean times. A 14-year gap in the playoffs from 81 to 95. But you're still with the Yankees. How was your role changed or defined then?
I grew up, and I hated the fact that I grew up because I loved being a bat boy, But in the middle of all of that, I left for a minute to go play professional baseball with the Pirates because I had gotten drafted in the 2nd round. And when I proved to America that I couldn't hit, I came back to the Yankees. George brought me back, and I started working for him as a consultant, as an advisor. Whatever he needed, I did.
In the early 90s, something changed because the core 5 began. That's right, Bernie Williams, Andy Pettitte, George Posada, Derek Jeter, and Mariano Rivera. All retained, mostly because of Gene Michael. Tell us what happened.
Gene Michael knew who to hire so that in essence they could find these guys, and he found the guys, they signed these guys, they kept them. I mean, everybody was asking for Mariano, everybody was asking for Bernie, And you know what? Gene would always tell the boss, nobody wants him, so that the boss wouldn't trade him away.
Okay.
And in turn, you know, Gene was able to keep him, and you know what? Gene did a masterful job, and the boss knew it, and the boss let him run as much as he could.
And you've had a lot of regimes here. Start with Gabe Paul, Bob Watson was in there, then Brian Cashman, and he's still there 20 years later.
Right. Brian Cashman's a great man. He's a smart baseball guy, and the boss loved him very much. The boss was very hard on him because of the fact that he wanted greatness out of this kid. A lot of times Brian didn't understand that, but you know what? I think now he does.
Now George was a racing fan and a sports fan too. Remember, he also there was football involved. He raced in the Derby in '97, Meadowlands Pace. He raced here. What about yourself? You a sports fan and a racing fan?
I was a follower, per se. I followed Lou Piniella, Bobby Mercer, and the most notorious of them all, Mickey Rivers, to the track, and I lost a lot of money. I fed a lot of horses because I did not know what I was doing, but it looked like fun.
But look at all the fun you had there. Now tell us now, all these years later, you started in '73. What is your message right now to the young 15, 16-year-olds who may not have a lot of direction going on at this point?
Anything in life is possible. You can do anything if you try hard enough. That was a message that was I first heard in the movie The Pride of the Yankees, and George Steinbrenner used to tell me that all the time. You can do anything if you try hard enough, and I think I'm living proof of that because I have tried everything, and I have succeeded in some. I didn't succeed in others, but you know what? I'm not afraid to try.
This sounds like it might have the makings of a book or maybe even a musical.
It
What do you
has
think?
the makings of a play on Broadway, a musical, and you know what? I'm very fortunate because I have great producers who want to take it to Broadway. They got Joseph Church, Karen and Rick are my producers. They have Joseph Church, one of the great musical directors in Broadway, who did Lion King, among other things, and he's done, about 10 songs already based on 161st Street, A Bronx Fable, I was actually born on 161st Street in Hunts Point. People are going to say it's Yankee Stadium, but my miracle was 850 East 161st Street. That's where I was born. I was born in the apartment.
So we get the book, we can watch the musical, but I want to ask you a question before we let you go. Around the world, anywhere you go, you will see people wearing Yankee jackets, Yankee hats. What is your answer to the question when you ask yourself, why me? Why did this happen to me?
You know what? I used to go to George Steinbrenner and say, boss, I want to thank you for saving my life. And the boss would say to me, I didn't save your life. When I looked into your eyes, your story was already told. And that was something that hit my heart and my soul. And so, you know what? I'm just taking that God has put me here to be a messenger in one way or another. And I'm lucky to have great people, great wife, great friends like Rick and Karen who believe in my story.
I'm going to tell you what I just took from that. You got and George got as much from each other as the other one got. What do you think of that?
Well, I take that as a supreme compliment, and I'm praying to God that George Steinbrenner gets into the Hall of Fame, because it's not that an ego thing, it's that people need to know the story of this great man. Not the baseball man, but the great man.
George Steinbrenner.
George Steinbrenner.
Eight years after he's gone, we still talk about him. Ray, we're so happy to meet you. Thanks so much for coming by.
Thank you.
We want people to be able to talk to you afterwards here, but the story's great, and we're going to look for the book and the musical on Broadway.
The musical. Rick, Karen, move your butts and get it on Broadway already.
Thanks so much to Ray Negron. We'll come back with Dave Brower. We'll be handicapping the card tonight.